shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
For many of us, the name Garrison Keillor would ring a bell. The great storyteller responsible for, I knew I was going to forget, Prairie Home Companion, and that land of Lake Wobegon, where all children are above average. Wonderful storyteller. Now, on the 10th anniversary of Prairie Home Companion, he told a story about himself when he was a young man, a teenager. And he tells the story of walking down the street. And as he's walking down the street, he sees coming at him a beautiful woman, stunningly gorgeous. And as a young teenage boy, his hope was to somehow gain her attention. So his brain is spinning about how he could possibly gain her attention. And he notices that situated between the two of them is this beautiful white Cadillac parked there at the curb. So he digs in his pocket, he pulls out a dime, he walks over, he plugs it in the meter, and then leans up against the white Cadillac. Very, very impressive. And she, the closer she gets, the bigger her smile gets. She has noticed him. And not only is she smiling at him, she starts heading right towards him. And as she gets closer, she says, "Thank you." And then she goes around and gets in the white Cadillac and drives off. Maybe not quite what the impression he wanted to make. Today, as we move into the Word and unpacking the Word, I'm going to ask you to hold that Cadillac as a parable. We all have this wonderful thing known as a life. We've been showered with days and with talents and with treasures. And what I'm going to submit to you today is like that Cadillac. Our lives don't belong to us, but they've been put into our hands for us to be good stewards of. Both the Gospel of John and the letters of John have very, very, very similar theology. Now, theologians argue whether it's the same author. It doesn't really matter. What's very clear is the same thought process is happening in both the Gospel of John and the letters of John. And that thought process, that theology that strings those all together is this dance. And over again, we hear the dance between Jesus saying, "I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. I abide in the Father abides in me." It's this dance. And the beautiful thing about the dance is the dance of the Godhead. Over and over again, Jesus invites us into that dance. I abide in the Father abides in me. If you abide in me, you abide in the Father. This beautiful dance. Well, the same thing happens today in that letter from John. And it is around testimony. 6 times testimony comes out in that very short reading, and 1 time testified. So this notion of testimony. Now, I know that that's not really a word that we use a whole bunch in the Lutheran tradition. There are other traditions that everybody's got their testimony and they make their testimony. While it's not a word that we necessarily use, while it might not be an act that we do to give up and give our testimony, the truth of the matter is we are all testifying to something. Every day, we testify to something. And the huge question is, what or whom do we testify to? as we are given the gifts, how do we steward them? How do we live them out? Because people are watching all the time. There's a story told of a police officer who pulls a car over. And as he pulls the car over, he asks the driver to get out of the car and to remain beside the car. And it becomes clear in the midst of this stop that he believes he is pursuing a stolen car. He checks the registration, he checks her license, and sure enough, it is her car, she is the right person, and she's indignant. She is ticked off. And at some point she finally says, "So why did you think this was a stolen car?" And the officer says, "Well, ma'am, I've been following you for a few miles now, and I've watched you cut off other drivers and run red lights and flip people off. And since the back of the car said, 'I love Jesus,' I figured the car must be stolen." What are we testifying to? This last week, I had a group of laborers in my backyard hauling out rock and block and brick and all kinds of manner of stuff. And as the days wore on, I got to have brief conversations with these people who were working so hard in my backyard. And through those conversations, I learned that one of the men, 33 years old, was in the midst of his finals. He's trying to finish up his high school diploma. So as a young man, as a 16-year-old, the family was poor, the family was hungry, and it was determined by him, by his parents, I don't know, that it would be better off for him to quit school and go to work as a laborer. He's now 33, he is still laboring. Here's the deal. His son is now 14. And the son is asking questions about how long dad stayed in school and how important school is. So dad is going back to pick up that education and to testify to his son that education is important. And education gives people choices other than hauling brick and rock out of somebody's backyard. There is a very successful businesswoman in this town, and as part of her work, not only does she serve as a businesswoman, she also serves as an educator, a mentor for other people in her field. And one day we got to sit down and she was telling me what her classes look like, what she's teaching, how she is encouraging other people in her industry. And when she got done, I said, "You need to come to a small group in our church." Because everything that she is saying to these young, new people in business is entirely congruent with what it means to be a follower of Christ. Into our hands have been given a whole series of gifts. The gift of belovedness and forgiveness. The gift of being called and blessed and sent. And the real question is, how will we steward what has been entrusted to us? Amen.
Well, it's a light in